Based on what you know today, what do you wish you would have implemented when it comes to physical conditioning / training when you were at the age of 25? To make the question more general, what do you believe is typically overlooked in this realm among very active 25-year-olds who wish to be in the race for the gold medals in the Centenarian Olympics?
Well, that's a question from my heart. Have I spoken publicly about the Centenarian Decathlon and the Centenarian Olympics? I didn't realize I had, but obviously I think you must have, because
there's a number of questions that talk about the Centenarian Olympics. Unless there's a Centenarian Olympics, I
honestly don't remember talking about this, but I did. Let me restate what I'm talking about, and that will put this question in context. About, 9 months ago, maybe a year ago, I just sort of had this epiphany, which was that the system's going to fail first in body for most people, which isn't to say always, right? So some people just die suddenly. Their mind and their body are fine, but they get struck with a disease and they die. For another subset of people, unfortunately not that small, their mind is taken from them first. So cognition gets robbed of them, and then eventually, either they die or their body also breaks down and away they go. But as I really reflected on what's going on, I think that for most people, the decline of mind, body, and then the burden of disease seems to be one by one in the wrong way, meaning body seems to fail first. So it got me thinking that, at least for me, how would I mitigate that? So I came up with this idea of backcasting instead of forecasting what I want to do in the end. And I borrow that term backcasting from Annie Duke, who wrote Thinking in Bets, a book that I love. And Annie will also be a guest on the podcast soon, I hope. So the idea of backcasting is, instead of trying to say, well, if I'm 25, what do I need to be doing tomorrow when I'm 26? And then what do I need to be doing when I'm 30? And what am I doing at 40? An easier way to do it is say, what do I need to be doing when I'm 100? And then how do I work backwards from that? And so for me, as a ripe old 46-year-old, 45-year-old, when I started thinking about this, the question was, okay, well, if I want to live to 100, and again, genetically speaking, I probably won't because I don't have the genes to get there. But let's assume that I can eke my way out to 100. That's 55 years away. What do I have to physically be able to do to be satisfied with my life? So as I went through that exercise, the way I did it was doing it through the lens of my kids. So I took the ages of my kids and I projected them forward to how old will they be when I'm 100? And that's an easy calculation to do. Obviously, anybody can do that for themselves. And then I said, well, probabilistically, how old will their kids be? So I said, well, my kids are this. Their kids will be approximately this range. And then you realize, wow, their kids are going to have kids by the time I'm 100. So by the time I'm 100, I'm going to have great-grandchildren that will likely be between 1 and 7 or 8. That's basically my calculation. Okay, so then I thought, okay, well, what are the things I'm going to want to be able to do when I'm 100 to just be happy? So it goes without saying, I would love to not be bedridden with disease per se. It also goes without saying that I would love to have the cognitive faculties that I have, or at least a high enough amount of them that I'm able to sort of have the executive function, processing speed, and memory that's necessary to sort of function. But then I really kind of double clicked on the physical part of this. So there are a bunch of activities that I want to be able to do. I still want to be able to shoot a bow and arrow. I still want to be able to actually exercise. I do enjoy, some people exercise because they have to. I think there are a number of us who exercise because we actually enjoy it, and it's fortuitous that it provides benefit. But the one I really focused on was the real simple stuff, the activities of daily living. And among them is playing with kids, right? So I started thinking about, well, what would I want to be able to do with great grandkids when I'm 100 and they're 3, 4, 5? And in going through that, I made a list, and there were 18 things on my list. And I just began to refer to that as my Centenarian Decathlon, which is problematic because a decathlon has 10 things and my list has 18 things. But notwithstanding that tiny little detail, what's the Latin origin of 18? I assume deca is Latin for 10 of something, right? Anyway, well, whatever. Okay, so we'll come up with a fancier term for it, or I'll figure out a way to consolidate. Nick, let us know. So my Centenarian Decathlon has these 18 things that I want to be able to do when I'm 100. And some of them seem so trivial that you'd be like, how is that even on your list? For example, I want to be able to get up off the floor with a single point of support, which means I want to be able to, using just one arm, get up off the floor. Now, it's not that it's the end of the world if I need to use 2 arms, but like I want to hold myself to that standard. I want to be able to drop into a squat position and pick up a child that weighs 30 pounds. I want to be able to lift something that weighs 30 pounds over my head, because that's about the weight of my little rollerboard suitcase. And I would really be bummed if I couldn't put that in the overhead compartment of an airplane. Presumably I'll still be flying on airplanes, and those will still exist.
You'll be flying yourself probably.
Yeah, right. We'll all have little jetpacks or something. I want to be able to get myself out of a pool without a ladder. Simple, right? Again, how trivial is that to do today, where you have 4 inches between the concrete and the water, and how easy is it for us to just pull ourselves out today without the ladder?
You've seen the guys that can jump without support. They can jump out of a pool, just jump out of a pool onto the platform.
No.
Yeah, I think there's some videos
nice
for that. Yeah.
So when I go through that whole thing, I then say, okay, what are physical tasks that would approximate those things? So for example, like picking up the 30-pound kid who comes running at you could be approximated by a 30-pound goblet squat. Lifting 30 pounds above your head in the form of a suitcase is also pretty easy to approximate with these things.
Goblet squat, just for the uninitiated, I usually think of it as like a kettlebell, but almost like you're holding a goblet in front of you. Mm-hmm. It's like a front squat.
That's right.
So you're going down, coming up.
That's right.
So imagine
picking up a child. Then I've just been working backwards from there, which saying, well, if I want to be able to do these things at 100, there's going to be a decline. I have to be able to do these things at 80. I'm going to need to be able to do it at this level at 60, and I need to be able to do it at this level today, again, given the inevitable decline. So most of my training today, in fact, I would argue all of my training today centers around that. I no longer train for anything that's not related to that. So I don't do any training that's related to racing or competing in anything, which is not to say it's bad to do those things. I'm just saying that that's the point I'm at in my life. So this is kind of a long-winded answer to what I think is a great question, which is a 25-year-old who's frankly thinking of something that most 25-year-olds I can't imagine would be thinking of. Certainly I wasn't thinking of this at 25. I mean, at 25, you're sort of immortal. But whoever asked this question is presumably realizing that, hey, in 75 years, the world's going to look different and I want to be able to do X, Y, and Z. So I don't know the answer because I don't know what that person's limitations are today. So rather, I would just say, what is the framework? And my framework for thinking about this is 4 components of exercise. One is stability. The second is strength. The third is aerobic performance. The fourth is anaerobic output. And I didn't go through all of my 18, but each of my 18 touch at least one of those, and many touch more than one. For example, the goblet squat requires both strength and stability. Walking up, one of mine is being able to walk up 3 flights of stairs with 10 pounds of groceries in each hand. Again, you and I could do that today, blindfolded and backwards. That starts to become harder when you get older. Well, that's got a little bit of aerobic. That's on the threshold of aerobic, anaerobic, and it's also got strength. So what I would be looking to do is say, how well am I doing on each of those things? Now, that said, in my experience, the one where most people start to fail first is stability. Because as a species, we usually begin to fail that once we enter school. And I think I've talked about this before, and I've certainly posted pictures of like my youngest son squatting. Yeah. It's just incredible. Like the way that they can do this is so beautiful. You don't have to be a kinesiologist to look at them and go, wow, they're so natural when it comes to these movements, everything they do. And the field of dynamic neuromuscular stabilization is in fact built on this principle, which is, there are about 13 or 14 movements that are completely innate to us. And by the time we're a year and a half old or so, we do them all perfectly. And then it's basically all downhill from there. Accelerated significantly by school. Once you start sitting, that's when we lose so much of that stability. And we, lose the ability to maintain tension through our pelvic floor and throughout the entire, I hate the term core, but core, of course, describing the diaphragm, the obliques, the transversalis fascia, and the entire pelvic floor. So my 2 cents would be spend as much time as possible working on dynamic stability, static first, then dynamic. And as long as you incorporate those principles into what you are doing strength-wise, that's great. Because at the age of 25, you can do a lot of dumb things and get away with it incorrectly. I think I've always squatted and deadlifted somewhat incorrectly. I don't think I've ever fully engaged. In fact, I know I've never fully engaged my pelvic floor doing those. And I think I got away with murder for a long time, though I now realize the damage that's occurred as a result of it.
Do you want to talk about I think it was your squat routine? I think you mentioned this to me one time, way back when with your buddies.
Oh, my high school, yeah.
Yeah.
The breathing squats?
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing routine. I don't know that I recommend this, but again, if it was once a week. So we lifted 6 days a week in high school, 3 hours a day. I mean, we just lived in the gym. And on Fridays, we would do this routine of breathing squats, which was you took your best 10 rep weight. So a weight that you were going to absolutely fail at 10 reps with. You loaded it on your back and you do a rep. And so you go down and up at your normal cadence. At the top, you took 3 of the deepest breaths you could take, each breath taking 10 seconds. So that takes 30 seconds. So it's a 5 in, 5 out, 3 of those, and then do another rep, and you do 20 reps. So the set takes 10 minutes. And by the end, it's the only thing I've ever done since that rivals that degree of discomfort is like an air bike Tabata. And this was like one of these knucklehead things we got out of like our bodybuilding magazines or powerlifting magazines. And the idea was like nothing will stimulate more strength and growth than that activity. And the reality of it is it worked. I mean, in the course of 1 year of doing that, I added over 100 pounds to my squat. And that was starting at a level where I was already pretty strong. And but what's so funny about it is like, it was so painful that on Thursdays, I'd start getting uptight. Like knowing that we were going to do this the next day. It was you just dreaded this pain so much.
Yeah, we might get into this too. There's it's called super slow or slow training. Doug McGuff is one of the guys at Body by Science, is one of the proponents. And he talks about lifting slow and basically accumulating time under tension of maybe 90 seconds, which I don't think people realize is like an eternity. And you're talking about what you're talking about, that if you actually calculate when you lift, if you're bench pressing or squatting or something like that, if you ever timed yourself and realize when you're working out like that and you're lifting weights, how actually little the time is that is spent under tension. And then you compare it to that, which is
because
stark.
In that 10 minutes, I'm not under the same tension the whole time. When you're standing, you're under much less tension. I mean, in many ways, my recollection of that was your upper body hurt as much as your lower body. Again, fortunately, it's been so long since I've done it. But honestly, I think that your traps, your lats, because, when you're squatting, you're really trying to wrap the bar around your neck. You have to engage your lats to squat. So the fatigue here, the fatigue there, I mean, the whole thing's a mess. But, your legs are getting a bit of a break during that period of time because you're locked out. So, 90 seconds of totally being under tension is an eternity if the weight is heavy enough. Which is the principle behind that whole lift.
Yeah. And on the note of centenarian decathlon.
We should call it the Olympics since there's 18 events. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about it. And I think one thing too, is that if you're thinking about doing a goblet squat, it's almost like a checklist of things that you want to be able to achieve. So it's not necessarily like going to the CrossFit Games and you're going to see how many goblet squats you can do for time compared to other centenarians. You're basically checking something off that you would hope to do. And one thing that I think, like once this is refined down to maybe less than 18, or maybe it's 18 events, is maybe put it in front of, there's a lot of ongoing centenarian studies. There's the New York, the Einstein one, which is the Ashkenazi Jews, long-lived centenarian study. I got that wrong. But there's the Thomas Pearls, where I think they actually have like in aggregate Italian centenarians, the Okinawans, and things like that. And I wonder how many of those centenarians, maybe even you give the list to Nir Barzilai or Tom
my
Pearls,
guess is
how many of them could do it?
None of them.
And
here's the reason. This is why I think this is different. Anyone who's a centenarian today, I'm willing to make an extreme statement, which I know is a dumb thing to do. Anybody who's a centenarian today is a centenarian because of their exceptional genes. They haven't hacked their way there. What we're talking about, people our age, is we're talking about hacking our way into being centenarians. So that is going to be very deliberate. Now, again, I'm not taking away from the odd centenarian who's also lived like a monk, but we know this really well because we've done all this research on it for the book. Most centenarians, they haven't done anything necessarily better than or worse than their peers. In fact, on average, they tend to smoke more, exercise less, and eat worse. So what we're really talking about is a completely new model, which is actually forcing your way to become a centenarian rather than just sort of gliding your way into it. Yeah. And therefore, I think it's going to require much more deliberate attention around what your mind and body are doing at that point in time.